You weren't invited to sit at the family table, my sister whispered angrily. Leave before you embarrass us. I looked at her across the decorated reception hall and kept my voice low. You're kicking me out of Mom's wedding reception? Security will escort you, she snapped. Just then, someone unexpected stepped forward. And everything in that room shifted. My name is Lauren Mitchell, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a hospital administrative coordinator. My job is managing chaos quietly. Scheduling conflicts, missing paperwork, last-minute emergencies, vendor disputes, staff complaints that need to be resolved before they become something bigger. I do all of it without raising my voice because in a hospital environment, raising your voice costs people something. I learned early that calm is a skill, not just a personality trait, and I practiced it until it became automatic. In my family, my sister has always been the one they talked about. She's 4 years older, professionally successful in the way that photographs well, and she moves through family gatherings with the ease of someone who has never once wondered whether they belong in the room. Relatives light up when she walks in. Compliments arrive before she sits down. She has always known how to make an entrance, and she has always understood that the people watching remember the entrance more than anything that comes after. I've always been the other one, the responsible one. The one who showed up after the entrance had already been made and handled the things that needed handling. After our father passed several years ago, I became the person our mother called when something needed to be organized. Bills, medical appointments, legal paperwork that confused her and needed someone patient enough to sit with her and explain it line by line. I did all of it without being asked twice because it was necessary, and because I was the one who showed up. My sister rarely helped with any of it. She sent flowers on difficult anniversaries and called on birthdays and appeared at gatherings looking impressive, and that was, for most of our extended family, apparently sufficient. I'm not wealthy. I drive a hatchback with a dent in the rear bumper that I keep meaning to get fixed, and I bring lunch from home most days, and I've worn the same dress to 3 separate family events because it still fits and still looks fine. I value stability and honesty and the quiet satisfaction of doing something correctly. I have never needed to be the favorite. I just needed to feel like I was actually part of things. When our mother announced she was remarrying, I was genuinely happy for her. I helped coordinate vendors in the months leading up to the wedding. I managed invitation logistics and confirmed deposits and kept a running email thread with every supplier involved. It was exactly the kind of behind-the-scenes work I had always done for this family, and I did it willingly because I wanted the day to go well for her. Then, 3 days before the wedding, something changed in how my sister spoke to me. The tone shifted. She became short and dismissive in our messages. She stopped copying me on vendor correspondence. I noticed it and filed it away and assumed she was stressed about the event. What I didn't know then was that the stress she was feeling had nothing to do with floral arrangements or seating charts. There was one detail my sister didn't know about me. I had already uncovered something serious. And I had already made a phone call. If you've ever been treated like a problem by the same family you spent years quietly holding together, you already understand the specific exhaustion of that position. Subscribe if you've ever been pushed aside despite being the one who did the actual work. Have you ever been excluded from something you personally helped organize? Share your experience in the comments below. Click hype before we continue. The wedding was held at a rented event hall on a Saturday afternoon in early autumn. The kind of venue that looks elegant in photographs, warm lighting, tall centerpieces, round tables with pressed white linens. I had confirmed the floral delivery for that venue myself 6 weeks earlier. I arrived in my good dress with a card for my mother and found my sister standing near the entrance with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting. You're not on the seating chart anymore, she said. Her voice was flat and certain. I stopped walking. What do you mean? She told me I was causing stress for Mom, that the kindest thing I could do was leave quietly before the ceremony began. She said it with the practiced calm of someone who had rehearsed the conversation and felt confident about how it would go. I told her I had spent weeks coordinating vendors for this event, that I had personally confirmed 3 separate deposits, that removing me from the seating chart 3 hours before the ceremony made no sense. This wedding is about family, she said. Not people who make problems. She said it loudly enough, not loud enough to shout, but loud enough for the guests arriving behind me to hear the shape of it, to catch the word problems and attach it to me as I stood there in my dress with a card in my hand. I tried to step around her to find our mother. She moved with me and told the nearest venue staff member to call security. Guests slowed their movement through the entrance. I felt their attention without looking directly at it. Someone whispered to someone beside them, and that person looked at me and looked away. I realized in that moment that she had already told a story to the relatives inside, that I had tried to sabotage the wedding planning, that I was jealous and difficult and had been causing problems behind the scenes for weeks. The story had arrived before I did, and it had done its work. Just before the security staff member started moving toward me, I noticed two uniformed police officers standing near the venue entrance speaking quietly with the event coordinator. They weren't venue security. They were wearing department uniforms and they were taking notes. My sister hadn't noticed them yet. Those officers were not there by coincidence. They had been called earlier that morning about a complaint connected directly to the wedding arrangements. I had made that call 4 days earlier. By the time I found a quiet corner of the venue lobby and checked my phone, the story my sister had been circulating among relatives had already reached most of the people in the building. Lauren tried to cancel the vendor contracts. Lauren was jealous of Mom's happiness. Lauren had been difficult throughout the entire planning process, and this was simply the final result of weeks of behavior that the family had been tolerating patiently. I heard variations of this from two cousins who approached me separately within the first 20 minutes, each one delivering the information with the careful gentleness of someone who isn't sure they believe it but doesn't want to take a side. Guests avoided my section of the lobby. People who had known me since childhood found reasons to look at their phones when I passed nearby. The wedding hadn't even formally started, and I had already been tried and convicted in the court of family opinion. During the reception speeches, my sister stood at the microphone with a champagne glass and a warm smile and said clearly into the amplified quiet of the room, "Some people simply can't stand seeing others happy." She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. Several guests did. I watched them look and look away, and I sat with what I was feeling and kept my face neutral and didn't move. Then the vendor calls started coming to my phone. 3 separate suppliers contacted me that afternoon asking about missing funds. Deposits they had confirmed weeks earlier had been reversed or rerouted. One vendor said someone had contacted them using my name and my email address to cancel a service and request a refund transfer to an account they couldn't verify. They wanted to know if I had authorized it. I had not authorized anything. I stepped outside the venue and sat in my car with the door open and thought carefully about what I was looking at. Someone had used my name and my contact information to alter financial transactions related to this wedding. The vendors were calling me because my name was attached to the changes. And my sister was inside that building telling everyone I had been the one causing problems. The shape of it came into focus slowly, and then all at once. What nobody in that building knew, except for one person I had spoken to on the phone 4 days earlier, was the habit I had developed over years of managing hospital logistics. I document everything. Every vendor email I sent or received during the wedding planning had been saved in a dedicated folder organized by date and supplier name. Every payment confirmation had been forwarded to a personal archive. Every text exchange about logistics had been screenshotted and stored. I did it automatically and without thinking about it the way I do everything related to coordination, because in my professional life, an undocumented decision is an undefendable one, and I had learned that lesson early enough that it became instinct. When the first vendor called me 3 weeks before the wedding to mention that someone had contacted them about adjusting a payment, I went back through my records and found the discrepancy within an hour. The email that had been sent to that vendor requesting the payment change had come from an address formatted to look like mine, with 1 letter different. The kind of address you create when you want something to appear legitimate from a distance. I traced it carefully over several evenings. The pattern was consistent. Multiple vendors. Similar email addresses. Payment change requests followed by refund transfers to an external account. My name attached to each request as the authorizing contact. I compiled everything into a digital folder. Time-stamped email records, vendor statements, bank transfer references, screenshots of the altered messages beside my actual correspondence showing the differences clearly. And then I called the non-emergency police line and filed a report regarding suspected financial fraud tied to the wedding vendor accounts. I gave them the folder. They told me an officer would follow up. I asked them to be discreet because I wanted the facts confirmed before anything became public. By the morning of the wedding, the investigation had already been active for 3 days. I said nothing to my sister. I said nothing to my mother. I went to the wedding in my good dress with a card, and I waited for the truth to arrive on its own schedule. I found my cousin Emily near the back of the venue during the cocktail hour. Emily is the cousin who sits at the end of the table at family gatherings and notices everything and says very little. She had been overlooked by this family for long enough that she had developed a precise eye for the things people preferred not to be seen. She was exactly the right person to have beside me that afternoon. She pulled me aside before I could say anything and told me she had overheard my sister arguing with a vendor on the phone several days before the wedding. The conversation had been about refund transfers. My sister's voice had been insistent and slightly too fast, the way voices get when someone is explaining something they know doesn't hold up under examination. I showed Emily the folder on my phone. She went through it quietly and carefully, and when she finished, she looked up and said, "Lauren, this is serious." I told her I knew. I told her about the report I had filed. She looked across the reception hall to where my sister was circulating between tables, accepting congratulations from relatives and laughing at the right moments and performing the role of the responsible daughter who had put this whole beautiful event together. "She's telling everyone you won't be part of this family much longer," Emily said quietly. I watched my sister across the room and felt something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite sadness. It was something colder and more settled than either of those things. Emily spotted the 2 officers near the event coordinator's station before I did. She touched my arm and nodded in their direction. I watched them speak quietly with the coordinator for a moment, and then I watched the coordinator's expression change. The investigation I had started from my car 4 days earlier was about to walk into the reception. It happened during the dinner course. The 2 officers moved through the edge of the reception hall with the careful, unhurried movement of people who are trying not to disrupt a room and know they are about to anyway. Guests began noticing. Heads turned. The sound of the room changed slightly, the particular change that happens when attention shifts collectively toward something unexpected. They approached the table where my sister was seated and spoke to her quietly. I couldn't hear the words from where I was standing, but I watched her face go through several expressions very quickly. "Why are officers here?" she said, louder than she intended. "This is a private wedding." One officer explained calmly that they were following up on a financial complaint related to vendor payments associated with this event. He asked if she would be willing to speak with them. She looked across the room and found me. I walked toward the table steadily and placed the printed summary of my documentation in front of the officer who had spoken. He looked at it briefly and nodded. "She's lying," my sister said. Her voice had changed. The warmth she had been performing all evening was gone, and what was underneath it was not something she had intended anyone in that room to see. "She's trying to ruin everything." "Then explain the email sent from your account," I said. I said it quietly. I didn't need volume. The room was already paying attention. The vendors had been contacted by the officers earlier that week as part of the initial investigation. 2 of them were reachable by phone that evening and confirmed separately that the payment change requests had come from contact information registered to my sister, not to me. The external account the refunds had been directed toward was traced to a personal account opened 6 months earlier. Guests who had been watching my sister accept congratulations all evening began looking at each other with the uncertain expression of people reassembling a story they thought they already understood. The relatives who had avoided me in the lobby. The cousins who had delivered the careful warnings. The family friends who had glanced at me during the toast. My sister's composure came apart in pieces rather than all at once. First, the warmth disappeared. Then the certainty. Then the performance of someone who had planned how this day would go and believed the plan was working. The officer informed her that she would need to answer questions regarding the financial transactions. He said it calmly and without any particular drama, because that is how those conversations go when the paperwork is already in order. The reception hall went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when something real has just happened inside them. The reception ended early. The event coordinator quietly began managing the logistics of an evening that had stopped being a celebration. Guests gathered their things in small groups and spoke to each other in low voices. The tall centerpieces and the pressed white linens looked the same as they had an hour earlier, but the room felt entirely different inside them. My mother found me near the exit. She had been told pieces of the situation by two separate relatives, and she looked the way people look when they are processing something that requires them to revise a story they had already accepted as true. She took my hand and held it without saying much, and I let her. Some relatives apologized before they left. The apologies were brief and slightly awkward, the kind that come from people who are embarrassed by how quickly they believed something without asking a single question. I accepted each one without making anyone feel worse than the situation already had. I didn't go back inside. I stood with Emily in the venue parking lot while the autumn air came in cool and the lights inside the hall gradually went dark table by table. She didn't say anything that needed saying, and I appreciated that. I had spent years in this family being the one who showed up quietly and handled the things that needed handling and received very little acknowledgement for any of it. I had coordinated this wedding from a spreadsheet on my kitchen table while my sister took credit for the parts that were visible. I had filed a police report from my car in a grocery store parking lot because I wanted the facts confirmed before I said a word to anyone. I had not argued. I had not confronted. I had not made a scene. I had simply kept the record and let it speak when the moment arrived. My cousin Emily drove me home that night, and we sat in her car outside my building for a while without turning the engine off. I thought about the years of keeping peace, the bills I had managed and the appointments I had tracked, and the phone calls I had made on behalf of a family that had spent those same years assuming I was simply always going to be there, available and quiet and uncomplicated. I thought about my sister standing at that microphone with her champagne glass and her warm smile and her carefully aimed toast. The sister who tried to push me out of that wedding forgot something important. The truth had already walked into that room before I did. If you've ever been falsely blamed in front of people you've known your entire life, you already know how that moment settles into you. It isn't just humiliation. It makes you question every relationship you thought was solid. Share your story in the comments if someone tried to damage your reputation with people who should have known better. Subscribe so this community can stand beside the people who face the same thing quietly and alone. Click hype to help this story reach someone who needs it today. Standing up for yourself is never simple when the people hurting you are the ones you grew up with. If you've been through something like this, subscribe and become part of this community. Let me know this story meant something to you by clicking hype. And tell me where you're watching from. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel.